Hello, we start our roundtable, Humans in the Post-COVID World. A bit of housekeeping. We'll listen to 4 short interventions by, for most people, I'll introduce them once again before they speak, and later we'll have a short discussion on the title of today's roundtable, Humans in the Post-COVID World. And we'll ask each other questions and we'll try to accentuate this very important and emotionally charged topic. So off we go. The first to intervene will be Lilia Ovcharova, Vice Rector of the High School of Economics. A very good afternoon, dear participants. This year, Gaidar's forum discussions revolve around the matters set forth by the pandemics before the world, before each and every nation and each and every family. Despite all the difficulties of the past year, I rejoice today. Why so? Because I introduced my intervention at a round table organized by the Center for Interdisciplinary Research for Human Potential, established by 4 research organizations. It is a network center with a grant for 5 years from the Education and Science Ministry. We'll be developing a world-class center in social life and humanities. Confucius will be the underlying point of my speech today. We all know the first quote, I wish all our enemies to live at a time of change. Another quote by him, that we shouldn't be afraid of change, is also well known, because the changes happen when and as necessary. This will be my conceptual framework for my report on how the pandemic impacted Russian households. And where does the social and welfare policy come into play? I'll rely on the research of the Social Policy Institute of the High School of Economics that I had. When we speak about the economic impact for the households, it's mostly about livelihoods and employment. In October 2020, we had a survey, and this is how families assessed their livelihoods. 35% of families believe that their income has dropped. Mostly Moscow residents said that for the first time for a long time. That was said in September and October, not in May or June, which means that the economy was rebounding at a slow pace and people had lost jobs, or their salaries had gone down, or there probably had been arrears in salary payments. What increased and augmented the economic risks and was served as a protection? Let's start with the risks. We have a breakdown of 3 types of risks. First of all, those who were employed in private services like restaurants, tourism and sales, although recently that was a token of success belonging to that bundle of industries. Then unofficial employment, with around 35 million people working informally. But this probably was not the sole income source for them. Only for 7 million people it was the sole income source. And the third bracket was the small enterprise employees and owners that faced major restrictions So what was the protection factors? Number one, an official contract. Even if they lost a job, they received a dole and a formidable package of support. Then the second was working in a major company or in the public sector. And the third success factor was being part of the IT sector, having digital competences and track record of remote work. I want to focus on the fact that the IT competences, digital competences, and the result-oriented work are becoming a key factor of the new inequality, as well as a factor of success. The governmental backing looks as follows. Let me start with citing the proportions of measures to GDP to support their people. Rich countries spend more money to support their people and back the economy. Many researchers say that during a pandemic, the social policies became an important factor of macroeconomic stability. The Russian Federation is in the mid-spending group of countries. There we can single out four national trends. First is helicopter money. Second, preserving employment and trying to prop up the rates of employment. Third, support measures that are time-tested. And fourth, the start of planned but new measures. For Russia, the fourth trajectory was opted. New measures to support families with children were introduced earlier than we had planned before. We started earlier, and as a result, 59% of Russian families received no support, according to our survey in October, and 28% said they didn't expect any support from the government. It was via children that families received support. Second, in terms of importance, was the unemployed support. 68% of businessmen expected support from the government, and a tiny proportion received. The fact that no adequate support was given to them impacted the sentiment of people and their political views. In 2018, the biggest chunk of population believed that the poorest should be supported. In 2020, most people believed that those who have borne the brunt and suffered should receive the support, not the poorest ones. Entrepreneurs and small enterprises suffered most, and this is the public consensus now. Prior to that, the population never noted the problems of the businessmen. Now, in conclusion, I'll speak about the problems of the middle class. I will not tell you whom we believe to be middle class representatives. We believe these are highly educated, well-to-do workers, and those who associate themselves to be part of the middle class. All these factors must be put together. 26 to 29% of the population is the overall score of the middle class. And we made an in-depth study of that income bracket, and social bracket, and as a result we figured out that not everybody changed their consumption models. Many people had buffers and savings, but for the first time since 2020, a major chunk of the middle class shifted to the poor class. leaping over the proto-mid-class or proto-poor people. For many people, what was a considerable, crucial factor, dramatic factor, was the shrinkage of their business or a shutdown of their business. Will that entail the new social institutions like the unconditional income or virtual practices? We do not know that. The unconditional income concept appeared as a response to the aging population and growth of inequality. The social policies are becoming a factor of macroeconomic stability, and new forms of unemployment and new forms of inequality appeared. And definitely that will push the government to shove and to introduce the unconditional income. Our scientists will study that in an in-depth fashion for the forthcoming 5 years. Thank you. Thank you for the first speaker. And our second panelist is Sergey Zuev, Director of the Social Sciences of RANEPA. The correlation between the technology platforms and the public confidence and trust is not a new thing to discuss. Technology optimists and pessimists and the paradoxes of public confidence is something that is not new to us, and we have been studying that for long. And the perception of the technologies being the critical factor in transformation and large and small social structures, and the concept of social trust and everyday technology practices have been studied by the Eurobarometer project in this country since 2012. Over the past years, we have seen major changes. However, against this technological backdrop, Jürgen Habermas's point that apart from two basic types of resources, which are power and capital, a third one is coming to the fore, that is called the social trust, is now becoming relevant as never before. And we're seeing historically rapid progress. In 2012, the technology agenda was not fully set and determined, and the attitudes towards technology was not part of the basic mindset patterns. And back then, it was about the everyday practices, and we dealt with and spoke about declarations and economic and political slogans and expectations that are mythical sometimes in their nature, in their essence. Progressions also were high on the agenda. By 2017, according to our measurements, the new technologies are something akin to the new ideology. It is a sleek mindset optimism demonstrated and posted by 42%. In the forthcoming future, the S&T progress will sort out all the major issues for the humankind. Technology phobia indicators and levels in Russia are the lowest in Europe. By 2017 and 2018, we saw that the confidence and trust with specific innovations were on the rise, like manless cars and a robot surgeon, a robot judge, and others. And those indicators had no relationship to the general technology optimism. The bracket of people, the category of people that did not believe in the scientific progress still laid hope and pinned hope on robots. Like in general, they didn't trust the science and technology progress, but they were fascinated by specific solutions and achievements and technologies. And the new technologies won the votes of those who did not trust political institutions. For example, from 2016 to 2018, the confidence with courts went down by 8%, and the confidence and trust with a robot judge went up by 6%. This is a curious correlation. Trust with a small group correlated positively and directly with the fall in the overall trust to public institutions. So, interpersonal confidence and trust was on the rise, as well as trust with the technology. These were local groups of interest and clubs, technology optimism being the inherent trait. And it was kind of a social escapism, and the crystallization of the public, negative public and critical public sentiment, skeptic sentiment. Back then, the new technology agenda came to the fore, correlating closely with the trust with public institutions. The question about where the new technologies should be applied, public administration is the most popular option, and rendering public services to people. Technology is considered as a medicine, a remedy to cure the imperfect practices in public administration. And there's a correlation with the level of education, by the way, which is obvious from the slide. Things changed dramatically in 2019. The parameters of technology optimism, general or declarative optimism, went down, and the trust with specific technologies remained unchanged or even grew slightly, marginally, especially towards a robo-judge. In 2020, that trend was further accelerated, and the hopes for science and technology progress by and large went down, but still the hopes pinned on specific solutions were maintained and persisted, and technology fears kept growing, for example, like this. The number of respondents who answered that I'm afraid I may lose my job because of the AI went up considerably from 8 to 26%, although it is way below the European levels of 53% of those who fear the AI may deprive them of job, or in the US 72% of people fear losing a job because of the AI. In our country it's only 26, but growing rapidly. The sobering effect of the 2020 will persist in the forthcoming years, and the declarative technology optimism will also be declining, will keep declining, and technology fears will be on the rise. In previous periods, technology was an antonym to government, to state, and the dissatisfied people pinned hope on that. Those unhappy with the public administration system. Currently, on the contrary, technology is perceived to be a follow-up on the public machinery, a part and parcel of the governmental machinery, and new technology phobias will come to the fore, will emerge. We will be able to verify that no earlier than in late 2021, but over the past 8 years, we may state that the technology novelties became to be identified with the state machinery, with government, which means that the government has been successful in tapping into this resource of technology. But at the same time, we are seeing that there is a big chunk of people who believe that technology is part of the governmental policies and is inherent with these policies. So we can see a lot of people with institutional distrust and discontent. And in the past, technology was a source of public optimism, but there is a reservation now that confidence with specific technology solutions is quite high.
As a matter of fact, concrete issues such as specific technological platforms and the level of trust amid the current conditions in Russia are very diverse. But despite all of this diversity, there is one unchanging fact which we can asseverate with a high level of confidence. The factor of technology correlates to this or that extent to different levels and types of trust. And it's not just about formal restrictions on different types of communications. It is a factor which has a substantive influence upon trust in the wide sense of the word in current social structures. Thank you. And our third speaker is Andrey Baykov, Prorector of MGIMO. The current planetary system is a conglomerate which is very diverse and multifaceted. And there are different narratives which are not exhausted by the traditional slew of intergovernmental relations. There are many aspects, technological, energy, and all of that, but not limited to that. And we see a transformation of the state institutions, social society, the state itself, which is based upon legitimate representation of society and also legitimate use of force, tries to survive amid the new trends of transnationalism and civic activism. And in that regard, the state is trying to show its role and relevance in society, and it tries to counter the narrative which brings to naught or invalidates intergovernmental relations as the primary form of international relations. In that regard, the state has to assume new roles, new functions. It has to show that it can tap into the potential of each and every individual and society due to its resources, taxes, and its experience. In other words, the state, the government, has to balance, on the one hand, as the great arbiter, the referee, and on the other hand, an institution that has to help each and every society. So, yes, on the one hand, it is subjected to its citizens and it brings into reality their wishes. On the other hand, it has the supreme authority. So this is a new trend. And there is another trend we can see, that we see new models and old models that coexist, both archaic systems and modern systems. We still see the legal state and rule of law, and on the other hand, there are different models that exist in our society, such as the right of the powerful, and added to that is a very thin layer of supranational elements. and they work on a global scale and ensure material progress of humanity on the whole, even though it is uneven and diverse. There are three research questions that are brought about by the pandemic. First, what are the mechanisms that will push the evolution of the global system? It used to be homogeneous and interlinked in terms of economy, but right now there are different changes that we've got to take into account. Secondly, how is the pandemic going to impact the link between governments and societies? In different types, there are authoritarian regimes and democratic regimes, and what the differences are going to be. And also, the third question is, how do we ensure that globalization goes on smoothly, and how it is going to come up against new factors. If we look at the first question, then we can maintain that coronavirus is a watershed, but not between different international orders, but between different views of globalization. On the one hand, the view of globalization as a linear process, and another view of globalization as a fragile system, which is based on factors we cannot always influence ourselves. So, globalization used to be vilified, but right now we see that it is something we need, even though there are many disadvantages to it. And this is a paradigm shift which is going to bring about pro-globalization views once the post-COVID normality gets back. And we do not think that it is going to have a significant shift in the role of government, because the basic parameters are still the same. The world order is not going to undergo any changes like it used to be back in the 19th century or the 20th century. There is not going to be any big redistribution of roles and power between different states and governments. So, even though the pandemic has had a great impact on the world, I do not think it is going to transform the world politically, even though, indeed, in some polities, the pandemic is probably going to bring about significant changes. Now, if we look inside governments, inside nations, we see that the pandemic is going to consolidate autocracies, whereas weak democracies will shift towards authoritarianism, and there is going to be an erosion of democracy, like we saw in certain countries where civil rights were very much restricted and additional powers were assumed by the government. There are different examples, and we can see that governments can introduce restrictive measures just as fast as they introduce them, and they can lift them just as fast. Right now, we can see that the diplomacy of vaccines, diplomacy of medicine is becoming yet another tool in the toolkit of governments. It'll play a role in bringing certain governments closer together, those governments that can mobilize resources to accomplish goals within a short time frame. This is going to be very important. it becomes evident that the government is going to become far more powerful. The government is going to once again claim the role of development institution. But there are going to be new tools that will address the unevenness of development. I would like to thank our third speaker, and finally our third speaker, Marina Butovskaya, head of the Center of Cross-Cultural Psychology and Ethology of MAN at the Ethnology and Anthropology Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. We can see that the pandemic has transformed all aspects of our life. 2 years ago or so, we couldn't have imagined the state of affairs we would be in today. We see global restrictions on the mobility of people inside countries and between countries. Mass events have been shut down, restrictive measures have been introduced, and I refer to different events, scientific events, sports events, even family gatherings and friendly meetings have all been called into question, and even saying goodbye to the loved ones that have passed away. Restrictions have been placed there too, but there is still a need for active contacts because they reflect the very nature of our social nature of humanity. We need to talk to our loved ones, to friends, to touch one another, especially and embrace one another, especially during times of stress. But social distancing and self-isolation have brought some changes to this traditional interaction, which only feeds our stress levels instead of alleviating them. Especially affected are senior people and lonely people. Their psychological state is exacerbated due to that. There are traditional rules for welcoming one another and fostering contacts among politicians and business partners. They have been a tradition, but due to the pandemic they have been called into question as well, and they have undergone some changes. Right now, no one is surprised when people do not shake hands or embrace one another. No one is surprised when people are simply bumping their elbows or feet, and the obligatory wearing of a mask also has an impact on our mimics and how we interact with our faces, facial expressions. Let me share with you a short analysis of our research on the conduct of people amid the pandemic restrictions. Based on the Russian experience, we have assessed gender differences, family differences, age differences during the pandemic. On the whole, women are demonstrating a higher level of stress as compared to male. Even though, in principle, if we compare it to the norm, we usually see that men are also demonstrating a higher level of stress. A high level of anxiety is seen among people living in bigger families. So far, the reasons are not clear, maybe because people are caring about loved ones and they are anxious for their well-being, and they might also be anxious about themselves because the chances of contracting COVID are higher in a big family because more people are circulating, coming and going, and the chances of contracting COVID are bigger. Lonely women have been demonstrating greater activity. They were venturing farther from home than men. If we look at families, as we can see, men have been demonstrating greater activity, taking the burden and the responsibility of winning the bread, during the lockdown. We believe that this trend can be explained by the revival of traditional stereotypes, like the stereotype of a breadwinner among men who have families amid the general stress and anxiety. And we see that the lockdown and social distances had a positive correlation to stress among women and the reverse proportion among men. Social integration and the need for communication, these are the most important specific traits of humanity. During the first wave of the pandemic, many people were suffering because they missed personal communication, and women found lockdown a tougher and more arduous tribulation than men. Even though many people live around the delusion that young people live in social networks, the lockdown demonstrated that young people need live communication just as much as older people. Our young respondents told us that the most difficult thing they had experienced was lack of communication, personal communication, live communication with their friends. Masks and social distances usually demonstrate responsible behavior of our citizens. According to our data, masks are most often used by those citizens that demonstrated the same responsibility with regard to social distancing. And we also see a correlation between wearing a mask and complying with the recommended social distance. Cross-cultural research of behavioral norm during the pandemic has also revealed some differences. As we can see, the fight against the spread of the coronavirus is carried out more efficiently, more successfully, if society has collectivist proclivities, whereas individualistic societies and cultures see some very negative incidents because citizens are ignoring or neglecting the requirements and the recommendations of the government in terms of wearing masks or social distancing. The world is looking forward to the return of normality, looking forward to getting back to its normal life. But the experience that we've learned from the pandemic is invaluable, and we've got to learn the useful lessons from this experience. And we should remember that in the face of such threats, the whole of humanity is vulnerable. Thank you for your attention. I would like to thank our speakers. So we have listened to 4 different points of view, views of the pandemic, the issues they have brought about, and what the consequences are, since you are specialists in different fields. I would like to ask general questions and to ask you to answer them. The first question is as follows. This is probably the first time in human history that we see such mass protective measures. Where does this love for a human being comes from? Why this love for human life? Because the structures of power, government bodies, why did they come to love human life and cherish it so? Where does this humanism come from? Well, this is a very good question, I would say. But to be honest, I don't think that humanism per se is the source of these measures. I think the nature of this phenomenon is different. It is more like a knee-jerk reaction. To be honest, this is not the first pandemic humanity is facing. When all of this happened, I studied the history of the Black Plague. Incidentally, it came from the same areas that the new infection has come from. It was somewhere near the Yanzi River, and it crept across Europe at a slower pace, but still it engulfed the whole continent. So these protective measures do not mean to protect those who are ill, but to protect those who have not yet contracted the disease. I'll pick up where Sergey has left off. I believe this reaction was predictable and anticipated, because all countries simply reacted as per the recommendations of virologists and specialists on infectious diseases. No one contested those recommendations. The question is whether you totally agree with the recommendation or not, because during the Black Plague, the density of population was different. I think right now what helped us was digital technologies and also remote communication, which has become possible thanks to that. If we had not had that, I think the response of many countries would have been different. China has given all other countries a chance to think on how to proceed. Epidemiologists have told us how to act in this situation. So, not humanitarian bodies, but more forceful bodies of governments were prepared for that. And of course, many people were afraid of contracting the disease because we did not know what we were up against, what this disease was about. I think now the paradigm is a little different. Psychologists have done their job as well. They managed to prevent this state of mind from degenerating into a general depression. As Vladimir has aptly said, all of this was disguised and wrapped as humanism, as love for humankind, even though there were other factors involved as well.
Well, a question to you, and if you look at the response and the attitudes in social networks and on social media, it's obvious that confidence with the governmental information is not always criticized, is seldom criticized. But at the same time, the trust with the official authorities is not high. How can we maintain a decent level of confidence? Thank you for the question. I think that it has several aspects. A source of unanimity of approaches, unevenness of approaches, is that now we're seeing the global social space with trans-border communications, and the state cannot ignore that, like practices applied in one country may be applied in other countries as well. Second, over the past several decades, the mechanism of influencing the behaviors of national governments via international organizations was shaped. There are some of the international stakeholders that are the opinion leaders because of their efficiency, or it is probably the roles played by international organizations. The third aspect is that any unpredictable and uncertain situation requires some reliable protection that will yield good results, and most countries followed suit of those who faced COVID earlier than them. And the trust is not universal. It is mostly about personal inconveniences and constraints on personal freedom. But the mass obedience by law, which is a token of social and personal responsibility,
осознанное движение навстречу государству. Кроме того, и государство благодаря тому, что оно видит governmental requirements, приобрело определенную смелость, уверенность в своих действиях и приобрело дополнительные возможности для более четкого и таргетированного управления социальным поведением. И оно эти возможности действительно отточило, отшлифовало и в каком-то смысле приобрело дополнительную силу в
Марина, и вопрос к вам, если позволите.
Thank you. Marina, question to you. You spoke about the high value of the epidemic. What lessons we must learn? What do you think? What are the key takeaways from the pandemic? First of all, the high value of people-to-people communication and interaction. It is personified, personal interaction. I can touch a person when it's a face-to-face contact, and I'm pleased to say that as when I deliver lectures to students, we all know that they are a new, ensuing generation. They all live on social media, so this is their natural environment. But my students start saying more and more often that this tenet is incorrect, because you need personal interaction. As humans are social beings, the second point of mine is that we should understand and realize our responsibility towards and before the society. And excessive individualism would be no good. And there are different types of states, collective states and individualist states existent worldwide. But anyway, collective interaction, joining hands is important. The third takeaway is more general. We're faced with global challenges, we're up to these, and COVID is one of them. Like looking what has been done, good or bad, or finding faults with others, is unbidden now. And the war vaccines is also uncalled for currently and in general. And everybody must be vaccinated, and the availability, accessibility of vaccines must be the priority and prerogative of the governments. The more people are vaccinated, the better. That will near the end of the pandemic. We are close to finalize the round table, listening to all the interventions and answers to the questions by the panelists. We may come to one simple conclusion. The pandemic has a humanitarian dimension, many of these, and all of these require our focus, require research, and we should learn the lessons so that we preclude that from happening in future and turning into something horrendous. I hope that our center, that we all represent, will keep on studying that topic, and in a year's time or in 2 years' time, we will tell you more what a psychological or humanitarian dimension of an epidemic means, and we'll be able to unveil terrific findings and outcomes to fight epidemics better. Thank you.